Hi guys, so I decided to break tonight's homework video up into two parts, so here's part two. This can be a tad bit confusing, and I don't think there'll be too many problems like this on tomorrow's quiz because we need to review it a little bit more, and especially when it comes to working with parentheses. So remember when I told you not to do KCC until you did the stuff in parentheses yesterday? Let's just go ahead and ignore that for a second. Let's try and use KCC, and then let's try and use the commutative property to see where it gets us. So it says, remember to distribute negative signs. I haven't taught you that yet. So for number 18, I want you to cross it off. There's a little extra that goes into number 18, and we'll talk about that at a later date. So for here, negative 3.5 plus 3 1/2 plus positive 3.5. Let's just use the commutative property. Let's say negative 3.5 plus 3.5 plus 3 1/2. When we do that, we all of a sudden see that, oh, I have a negative 3.5 plus 3.5. I have the additive inverse here, where these two will add up to 0 plus 3 1/2, and my answer will just be 3 1/2. So a somewhat complicated thing of like, oh, do I have to convert these decimals to fractions and back and forth and all that stuff became super simple by using the commutative property and then recognizing we have the additive inverse. Sometimes you just have to kind of see that ahead of time before you start working the problem. So let's look at 16 together as well. So negative 1 4/5 plus negative 3.8 plus 1 4/5 plus negative 1.4. So let's use the commutative property. You might be like, oh, let's break it apart, Mr. Mason. Let's first use the commutative property. Negative 1 4/5 plus positive 1 4/5 plus negative 3.8 plus negative 1.4. So hopefully you realized, now I see why you wanted to use the commutative property, because you're like, boom, that's the additive inverse right there. That adds up to 0. So we're left with plus negative 3.8 plus negative 1.4. This is just an SSAK problem, so let's do it off to the side over here. And when I add this up, I get 2, carry my 1, 5.2, but remember, I got to keep my negative sign, so negative 5.2. So again, try and use the commutative property of addition on number 17 and see if that can't help you out. Last problem I'm going to help you with is number 19. So we have 16 over 20 plus positive 1/8 plus negative 4/5. So how about, before we even work this, we go ahead and we try and find common denominators. So times 4 times 4. Right? Relax about this for just a second, and let's do the fractions first. So I get 16 over 20 plus 1.8 plus negative 16 over 20. And hopefully now you're like, oh, I see why you did that. So let's use the commutative property and say 16 over 20 plus negative 16 over 20 plus 1.8. And boom, we have the additive inverse of 16 over 20 gets canceled out. You get 0 plus 1.8. And now you had avoided the entire thing of being like, oh man, I'm going to have to convert 1.8 to 1 and 8 over 10 and then find common denominator there. But again, if you can just see stuff ahead of time, kind of in advance, am I going to use the additive inverse? Am I going to use commutative property when looking at a problem? It might be easier for you. All right, so that's it. Remember to use the Canvas quiz tonight to check maybe your other answers. Remember, your binder is collected tomorrow, so have that organized, have notes complete, and you should be good to go for tomorrow's quiz. Call me if you have questions.